At the forefront of this story is a building in the commune of Soissy-sur-Seine, Essonne, on the southern outskirts of Paris. But don't imagine a huge high-rise. It's a small, cozy four-story building from the 1970s, with a friendly concierge housing a couple dozen apartments, each with a small balcony. A nice building in a quiet, safe neighborhood. It was here on the second floor that 24-year-old Audrey Joannet lived. The apartment belonged to her mother, Marie-Antonia Joannet, but after a new man named Bernard came into her life, she moved to live with him about 100 kilometers away from her daughter. On Thursday, September 15, 2005, Audrey's friends became seriously worried. They hadn't heard from her in 2 days. The girls called her, stopped by her apartment, but no one answered or opened the door, even though Audrey's car was parked outside. The friends hesitated to bother Audrey's mother, thinking it might be nothing, but they reached out to Marie-Claude Vigo, a friend of Marie-Antonia who lived in the same building. Madame Vigo tried to get in touch with Audrey, but in vain. She asked the concierge if Audrey had told him she would be away for a few days, but he knew nothing. However, the concierge kindly offered to leave a note for Mademoiselle Joannet, asking her to get in touch as soon as she returned. That was the plan. Additionally, the concierge insisted on calling Audrey's mother so she would be informed of the situation. After the concierge's call, Marie-Antonia came home and opened the door with her own key. As expected, her daughter was not in the apartment. The mother noticed that the apartment, especially the living room, was somewhat messy. There were dirty plates with food left out, and in Audrey's room lay a suitcase with belongings from her trip to Brazil. Marie-Antonia noted that her daughter could have at least tidied up after herself, as this kind of mess was very uncharacteristic of her. Overall, though, it looked like her daughter had simply stepped out somewhere. But where could she have been for 2 whole days? Even though Audrey had been living alone recently, she always told her mother when she was going somewhere, especially if she planned to be gone for a long time. It seemed that the last person to see Audrey before her disappearance was her best friend, Aurélie. Audrey had invited Aurélie over to her place on Tuesday evening. The two had dinner together, and Aurélie left at around 1 a.m. the next morning. The friends had planned to meet again to go shopping, but Audrey didn't show up at the meeting spot. So, first Aurélie, and then Audrey's other friends and family, began wondering what could have happened between Aurélie leaving at 1 a.m. on Tuesday night into Wednesday and the next morning when Audrey failed to meet her friend. Audrey had just returned from a trip to Brazil, hadn't even unpacked her suitcase, and probably didn't have the energy to go anywhere else so late at night. All of this was very strange and didn't fit Audrey's character. Marie-Antonia decided to call her daughter's friends. She went into Audrey's room and rummaged through a bag lying near the bed to find their phone numbers. While she was searching through the bag, her foot caught on something, but she didn't have time to think about what else was lying on the bedroom floor and left the room. She called all of Audrey's friends. No one knew where she was. She also thought to contact the bank to see if her daughter had withdrawn any cash or made any transactions. Nothing. In the afternoon, Madame Vigo suggested to Marie-Antonia that it might be a good idea to contact the police. But at the police station, an officer disappointed the women, saying that Audrey was an adult and had the right to go somewhere without informing anyone. Marie-Antonia explained to him that no matter her age, Audrey was her daughter and she was worried. The officer suggested waiting until the weekend, and if there was no news from Audrey by then, they would revisit the matter on Monday. Marie-Antonia returned to the apartment, hoping her daughter would appear soon. Bernard came to support his beloved woman during this difficult time. They talked a little about the situation and went to bed. Bernard managed to fall asleep, but Marie-Antonia tossed and turned, unable to calm her anxiety. Suddenly, it was as if lightning flashed through her mind. She jumped out of bed and went to her daughter's room. She remembered that while searching for her daughter's friends' phone numbers in her bag, she had touched something. A few hours earlier, she hadn't thought much of it, but now she realized what it was. It was hair sticking out from under the bed. The mother bent down, looked under Audrey's bed, and saw her lying there. Marie-Antonia grabbed her daughter by the shoulder, saying, "What are you doing here? I've been looking for you since this morning." Only when she saw her daughter's head and body did she notice marks from a ligature on her neck and understood everything. Her daughter was naked, badly beaten, and clearly murdered. Marie-Antonia screamed so loudly that neighbors on other floors heard her. Of course, Bernard rushed in. He ran into the room but immediately stopped, embarrassed by his stepdaughter's nakedness. When he realized what had happened, he immediately called the police. It was truly an unimaginable tragedy, and the way the mother found her daughter only intensified the pain of her loss. Maria Antonia stayed in the apartment for almost 24 hours, spending the entire time beside her daughter's body, whom she had been searching for all day. The police arrived on the scene. Forensic experts collected 3 cigarette butts, a soda can, and plates that were on the living room table, although it was clear these remained from Audrey's dinner with her friend. Overall, aside from the body, there was nothing suspicious in the apartment. There were no signs of forced entry on the front door or any of the windows. This was exactly why Maria Antonia hadn't noticed anything unusual. The investigators took this as an indication that Audrey had opened the door to her killer herself. Audrey's body was shoved under the bed, completely naked. There were marks of strangulation on her neck, most likely from a rope that the killer took with them. The victim's body was covered in bruises. She had been brutally beaten, with especially severe blows to her head and face. There were marks on her ankles and forearms indicating that her hands and feet had been tied. Later, the forensic expert would find evidence of sexual assault. Audrey had clearly been violated both anally and vaginally. Male semen was found in her vagina and mouth, enough for the police to obtain the rapist's DNA. However, there was no match in the national DNA database. Toxicology tests also revealed traces of a sleeping drug in her system, which was strange since, according to Audrey's mother, she had never taken such medication. The investigators spoke with Audrey's family, and they insisted that they could never have imagined anyone capable of harming her. Everyone loved her. She had no conflicts or quarrels with anyone, did not use any drugs, and was a very responsible, calm, and balanced young woman. She was also very sociable, maintaining friendships with some people since kindergarten. They loved her for her kindness, willingness to always help, and generosity. Audrey was fearless and curious about new things without prejudice or judgment. Her greatest passion was traveling. She had spent 6 months living in London, then traveled to Greece and Brazil. She had just returned from Brazil the day before her death and hadn't even unpacked her suitcase yet. Besides speaking with family and friends, the police also interviewed all the residents of the building where Audrey lived. One of her neighbors, Gerard Barreau, said that on the night between Tuesday and Wednesday, around 3 or 4 in the morning, he heard a scream. It sounded to him like a woman crying out for help. Despite his wife's protests, he went outside to check. He walked around the building and noticed the light on the 2nd floor in Audrey's apartment. The light went out just as he was looking at the window, and he thought that Audrey had noticed him watching and turned off the light out of embarrassment. Gerard said this happened around 4 in the morning. Before this, the police only knew that Audrey had been alive at 1 in the morning when her friend left. Now they had a new time, 4 in the morning, when someone was definitely alive in the apartment. Gerard asked the concierge about the scream, but the concierge hadn't heard anything. The concierge conducted a little investigation, asking other neighbors, and told Gerard that apparently he was the only one who heard the mysterious woman scream. But here's what's interesting. On Wednesday afternoon, when Gerard went to speak with the concierge named Jean-Luc Caillez, he was met with a locked door. The residents were not used to locked doors. They knocked, tried calling, and finally decided to contact emergency services. The firefighters arrived. Jean-Luc opened the door for them and explained that he was having an episode of a chronic illness he had contracted during his military service in Africa. He assured them he knew how to manage it, had everything he needed, and was fine. The firefighters left. Indeed, the concierge recovered quickly and was back at work as usual on Thursday. The building's residents grew worried when Jean-Luc suddenly didn't show up for work because they genuinely liked the kind, friendly concierge. The only person who didn't share this opinion was a young woman. She filed a complaint with the police after catching him once trying to enter her apartment with a set of keys she had no idea he even possessed. This woman was certain she had never given him a duplicate key. Jean-Luc appeared surprised, mumbled some unconvincing apologies, and left. But the woman got goosebumps from his gaze. Even though it was just a feeling, she was sure that he wasn't interested in stealing her wallet or anything like that. No, she sensed a strong sexual attraction emanating from him. Before the police could fully focus on the concierge's unusual behavior, he showed up at the station himself. He told the officers that if they did their job well, they would discover he had a criminal record for sexual assault. However, he added that he could not have assaulted Mademoiselle Joannet because he had undergone chemical castration. Still, he said they might find his DNA in her apartment since a few weeks prior. She had problems with wasps, and he had brought her insecticide. The detectives were unsettled by his words. Why did he mention assault? At that time, although the victim was found naked, the pathologist had not yet performed an autopsy or reported any signs of sexual violence. They ran his name through the database. Jean-Luc was born in 1957 into a large family, but when he was about 10, his parents separated and his mother left the children. After that, the boy's life went downhill. He dropped out of school and got involved in petty crimes and thefts. When the police arrested him, he was given a choice: prison or service in the Legion. He chose the Legion, but after his service, he returned to physical assaults and sexual offenses. His first conviction was in 1984 for assaulting a young woman who had just parked her car. Jean-Luc dragged her into the woods, threatening her with a weapon. He assaulted her, but then unexpectedly decided to take the victim home. He talked non-stop during the drive, giving her his name and address. This obviously made it easy to arrest him. When the police came, he immediately confessed. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison in 1984. He was released at the end of 1999, but was free for only 6 months. He took an interest in his neighbor and her 19-year-old daughter. As a friendly neighbor, he once appeared at their door with chocolate mousse. The neighbor found the mousse's taste odd, but her daughter ate almost all of it. Besides the usual ingredients, Jean-Luc had laced it with sleeping pills. The girl quickly fell asleep on the couch. The mother and daughter planned to have lunch, but since the daughter was asleep, the mother went alone to the restaurant. The girl woke up feeling dizzy and swaying. When she opened her eyes in horror, she saw the neighbor who had broken into the house through a window and was now using a trap he had set. After he finished, he forced the girl to take 2 more sleeping pills and left. Naturally, the victim identified her attacker, and Jean-Luc was sent back to prison. A psychiatrist examined him and bluntly declared that Jean-Luc was incurable. His crimes escalated in severity and cruelty, a conclusion Jean-Luc did not dispute. He openly stated he should never be released because the next time would be worse. While incarcerated, he himself requested chemical castration, that is, medication to suppress his sexual urges. The rapist was sentenced to 20 years, but was released after 12. By 2002, he was free again. Since only one person remained willing to maintain a relationship with him, his mother, he moved closer to her in Essonne. In June 2003, he found a job as a concierge in the building where the victim lived. The residents liked the pleasant, polite, and tactful concierge. He was always ready to help, performed his duties very well, and was genuinely appreciated and loved. He delivered mail, watered plants, and some neighbors even trusted him with keys to their apartments. Nevertheless, he had a criminal record. The police asked the man to provide a DNA sample. Although he had the right to refuse, he agreed quickly and without hesitation. On September 20th, the man was brought to the police station and a DNA sample was taken. Why wasn't his DNA in the database, despite him being a repeat offender of similar crimes? The fact is, when he was convicted the second time, collecting and entering offenders' DNA into the database was not yet mandatory. This procedure was implemented only later. While the man was at the station, he willingly talked about himself and his life. Soon the laboratory results arrived. The DNA samples did not match. Someone else had assaulted Audrey Joannet. However, the police were not ready to dismiss the possibility of Jean-Luc's involvement. They decided that it might have been a case of gang assault and that Jean-Luc could still be connected to it. The police tried to pressure the man, and in response, he broke down and shouted that he had not abused Audrey. Audrey? So now to him, she's just Audrey, not Mademoiselle Joannet? The slip of the tongue spoke volumes to the investigators. After all, Jean-Luc had never once called any other resident by their first name, always showing respect. He had no reason to call Audrey by her name, yet clearly, at least in his own mind, he perceived their relationship differently. Despite the DNA mismatch, the prosecutor allowed the suspect to be held at the station until 8 p.m. The police wanted to use that time to find out why he addressed the victim by name, unlike all the other residents. Jean-Luc fell silent. The silence dragged on, but finally he simply said, "It was me. I'll explain." He told them everything happened on the night between Tuesday and Wednesday at around 4 a.m. The man put on dark clothes, pulled on a balaclava, grabbed a weapon and a set of keys, and approached Audrey's apartment. He opened the door, but unfortunately for him, the girl had used the door chain. So even though he had a key, he couldn't get inside. Then he heard a voice. Audrey wasn't asleep. She heard the sound of the key turning in the lock and came over. She asked, "Who's there?" In as high a voice as he could manage, Jean-Luc answered, "It's me," hoping she would think it was her mother. The poor girl believed that her mother had come unexpectedly and had removed the chain. But instead of her mother, standing before her was a man armed with a rifle, his face hidden by the balaclava. She screamed in terror and fear. That was the very scream Gerard, her neighbor, heard, the scream that made him get out of bed and walk around the building. Since the girl didn't scream anymore and the light in the apartment went out, it can be assumed that Jean-Luc either struck Audrey or held the weapon to her face to silence her. Then Jean-Luc caught the investigators off guard by asking, "Where and when do you think she died?" The police replied that, in their opinion, the victim had died in her apartment around 4 o'clock in the night from Tuesday to Wednesday. The killer looked at the officers with a smile and said, "No, she died much later and not where you think." He explained that from 4 to 6 in the morning, he held Audrey in her apartment. Then, threatening her with a weapon, he forced her to get dressed and led her to his concierge's room, risking running into someone on the stairs. As soon as they were in his room, he took off his balaclava. This meant he had already decided that Audrey would not leave his room alive. The investigators asked why he took her there. "To play with her," was his answer. The man undressed Audrey, shaved her pubic hair, made her take a shower, and tied her to a chair. But despite going so far in his confession, he suddenly claimed that he untied her, made her some French fries, and they watched the horror movie Halloween together. Then he took a rope, wrapped it around the girl's neck, and strangled her. It was a strange version of the kidnapping, one that didn't explain the signs of violence and the terrible bruises on the girl's body. For some reason, he chose to omit those details. Now the firefighters' arrival was seen in a completely different light. Unbeknownst to them, they had been just a couple of meters away from Audrey, who was in the room of her rapist and murderer. And of course, Jean-Luc could not allow the firefighters to examine him, let alone take him to the hospital. By the end of Wednesday, Audrey had spent about 12 hours tied to a chair in the concierge's room. The man had his fun, then took the rope and began strangling Audrey until she stopped breathing. During the night, he moved the victim's body back to her apartment, closed the door, and calmly left. There was one question that kept troubling the police. Where did the semen found on the girl's body come from? And then Jean-Luc gave the police the key to his unimaginable plan. The man proudly declared that he got the idea from the American TV series NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, in which a criminal planted someone else's DNA at the crime scene. Jean-Luc thought, why not do the same? He knew all the residents of the building well and was aware that one young woman regularly had a boyfriend visiting her. After one of the boyfriend's visits, Jean-Luc found a used condom in the trash bin. Using a syringe, he collected a sample of the semen and froze it. After killing Audrey, he inserted that semen into her mouth and vagina to mislead the investigators. What a devious plan. And if it had succeeded, it would have been the perfect crime. Had Jean-Luc not confessed, the innocent boyfriend would almost certainly have been sent to prison, as it was unlikely he could provide an alibi for 4 o'clock in the morning. This case was shocking because at that time, no such incidents had been recorded in France. It also showed that DNA evidence is not absolute proof. In this case, the key evidence would be the confession, not the DNA. During the interrogation, the man also claimed that due to chemical castration, he could not have assaulted the girl sexually and that he used a cucumber to simulate penetration. This may have been partially true. However, the police quickly learned that such treatment is reversible. Once Jean-Luc stopped taking the medication, he could fully restore his libido. The police were glad to get the confession but knew it would be good to gather more evidence for the case. Jean-Luc led the detectives to an empty apartment in the building, for which he had a duplicate key and where he kept the rifle and keys to Audrey's apartment. Then he took them to the banks of the Seine, about 100 meters from the building, where he had thrown 4 garbage bags containing sheets, a condom, Audrey's clothes, and some adhesive tape. Suddenly, Jean-Luc made another statement. He said that since the investigators had been kind to him and didn't condemn him, he would give them a little gift. They returned to his apartment, where he asked the police to check the ventilation system. There, they found a second used condom. The detectives decided it had been prepared for an attack on the next victim. As if reading their thoughts, Jean-Luc said, "Good thing you stopped me now, because I would have killed again." The man was charged, and the case was handed over to the prosecutor. The prosecutor decided to hold a reconstruction of the crime. At first, Jean-Luc demonstrated how the events unfolded to a female police officer, but when it came to the murder, he asked for her to be replaced by a mannequin. He showed how he strangled Audrey, then suddenly declared that he had done it wrong and started strangling the mannequin again. It was clear that he was taking pleasure in the process, despite the police presence. However, the pathologist attending the reconstruction stated that Jean-Luc had not shown how he inflicted the victim's bruises. This enraged him. and Jean-Luc lunged at the pathologist, shouting that he would kill him. When he lost control, everyone saw his true nature. One could only imagine what Audrey must have felt in his hands. In May 2008, Jean-Luc appeared in court for the third time in 24 years. He immediately told his lawyer that he would not appeal if found guilty because if released, he would commit the crime again. The 50-year-old man was sentenced to life imprisonment. He will be eligible for parole in 2027 when he turns 70. When the verdict was announced, those present in the courtroom openly expressed their joy. The convicted man refused to say exactly what he did to Audrey, although it is not hard to guess that he drugged her with sleeping pills, after which she became a toy for a man who enjoyed her for 18 hours without any restraint. Marie Antoinette considers the sentence fair, as it is the maximum punishment for such a crime in France. But she hopes that in 2027, when Jean-Luc becomes eligible for parole, he will not be released.